The canvas lines looking for where all the leaks are. They have to block the lines, block traffic.
Nobody likes them.
All right, so I think most of the people here know me. Just to reiterate real quick, I'm Jason Carney. I've been doing software development. I've recalculated for close to 22 years, or 20 years now. And so Tim wants us to get together to do these meetings so that we can, one, actually see each other since we're all in offices all the time, and two, kind of collaborate more, talk about what we do, where we're going, get people interested in not the bleeding edge stuff, but definitely the leading edge standards of today when it comes to web development. And of course, we touched a little bit 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago on Bootstrap. And so to start this out, I was going to go ahead and just touch lightly on, we talked a few minutes about Bootstrap last week, or 2 weeks ago. And just, so the reason we need libraries like Bootstrap and things like Less and Sass and jQuery, the big one, and all these modern techniques is back in, what was it, 98, 97, somewhere around in there, Apple came out with the iPad. So suddenly we had an internet that looked horrible on anything smaller than a desktop monitor. And phones, I remember I got my first Motorola Storm, and it was a big touch screen, actually a click screen phone. It had the biggest screen at the time, and I thought it was awesome, except I couldn't even go to Verizon's website and look at anything. It was completely useless back then. Everything on the internet was built in tables. You had the side scroll, fonts were so small you couldn't really read anything. It was pretty much useless. So eventually Twitter came up with the Bootstrap responsive design. So we got rid of the tables mainly, and we came up with ways of, with media queries, of showing things on big screens and not showing them on smaller screens, and basically with the same web page having it look and function, actually functional on smaller screens, on multiple devices, whether you're working on a tablet, a phone, or a desktop monitor. And even nowadays, I'm seeing more people throw stuff up on their giant Super HD, what do they call those new HD TVs, the 4x or something like that, 4Ks. So you can actually use those as runners, it seems. So, Bootstrap kind of brought in the era of true responsive design. A lot of times you don't need a native app to run on a phone or a tablet because if you don't need a lot of control over the hardware and you don't need alerts when you're not actually on the web page, it makes sense. It's a lot less expensive to build just a regular website that the user doesn't have to go to the App Store to download. And it's a lot cheaper. Development is easier. Maintenance is easier. And you can build a pretty good-looking site, functional site, on a small device. So to get started with, to recap real quick on the Bootstrap, again, this is backed by Twitter, and part of what we're doing here is mainly just giving you guys an insight to, we've got all different levels of people here. We've got people who've never even heard Bootstrap to people who this course is going to be something they've known for years. So I was actually thinking of talking to Tim for when we want to get into real deep level stuff. We'll set it up that way so that we know that when we go into it, the people that are involved in those meetings actually are anticipating a much deeper level of knowledge to be transferred. For today, at this level, we're basically going to cover the website, stuff you're going to use most often with Bootstrap, which would be the grid and some other things. And just to give you an awareness of what Bootstrap is, how to use the site, and what it can do for you. And then we'll move into jQuery. We'll talk about jQuery, jQuery UI, Sizzle, jQuery Mobile, and jQuery unit test. Again, fairly high level, just to give everyone an idea of what's possible. One of the things Tim's is hoping for is that this will cause conversations between us. And so if somebody is really interested in working on Bootstrap, anybody can come to me at any time, and we can dive deeper, or you guys can get together in groups. And if what Tim's really hoping for is that you'll find something that you're really interested in, that you become good at, and you want to share with other people. Tim would love that, David. And so it's basically just to spread some knowledge, get some cooperation with everybody working together. And let's get started with the grid. So in the second tab, getting started, this basically goes over, actually let's start with what the CDN. How many people here are familiar with what a CDN is? Oh, most of the room is not. Okay, this is very good. So CDN stands for a Content Delivery Network. They're basically servers that are set up all over the world. Some of them, like Twitter Bootstrap and Google, Microsoft, they have CDNs. There's also CDNs that hold multiple libraries, multiple companies' products. And they're set up all over the world so that when you go to a website, if they are using a CDN, say Bootstrap, it will pull from a server that's closer to your location. And if you've been on somebody else's website that is using that same CDN, same version number, same everything, it will use the cached version that it already has in the browser instead of downloading another version of it. So again, it saves time. And also with a lot of people using their own data now, I know some tablets you can use with Verizon that use your data. All your phones use data, and data is expensive. So if you're not having to download these libraries all the time with your data, it can save you some money in the long run. So just a thing to think about when you're developing. If you can save your clients time and money, it's usually a good thing to do. So basically what this is the jQuery, Bootstrap library, and it's actually going out to Max CDN Bootstrap. So it's hosted by Twitter. These have good uptime, and you're also saving bandwidth on the company servers or the institution servers. The integrity is to make sure, that's simply to make sure that there's no somebody trying to hack something, some code into you.
Are you sharing the screen? Someone looked like someone can't see it, said they can't see the screen.
It's not good. Hit the
No.
button. Second button.
There we go.
That was cool. Thanks whoever posted that. That's why Tim's supposed to set this stuff up. So basically this is just a hash to make sure that you're not getting something you don't want on your machine. And the cross origin, that's actually an enumeration between anonymous and used credentials. Most of the time it's going to be anonymous, especially if it's a public CDN like this one is. You would use the credential one if you are connecting to probably your own CDN that you want only hosted for certain people that you want to be able to hit your CDN. But again, CDNs are a great way of saving time and money for your clients. There's different ways to install. Each one of these can be very complex. It's not something we're going to cover in this course on actually how to do those installs. At the end of this course, we will briefly cover NuGet Package Manager, which is Microsoft's implemented version on Visual Studio. That one is pretty easy to use. It's kind of a beast. It will hammer your site if you're not careful for your code. But in general, it works really well. And these are for more non-Visual Studio setups. You got to be pretty good at knowing your open source infrastructures. And Bower is one of those. NuGet Package Manager, or Node Package Manager. I'm sure people are starting to hear about Node. It's been out for a few years. They're actually running servers in Node. It's JavaScript implementation running as a server, which is interesting. It's been out for a few years, though, and it's pretty stable and fast. Auto prefixers for if you're using less. Bootstrap actually does use less. And when you're doing it through Visual Studio, everything's taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about setting any of the stuff up. They do have a SaaS version of Bootstrap too that you can download. We'll be talking more about less and SaaS too in this presentation, or the next one, depending on how long it takes for us to get through this. Grunt, just as a quick view, you've seen words that may have never seen before. Grunt is a build tool. A lot of time with Visual Studio, we're really pampered. Builds, as Keith notes, are usually pretty good once you get all the kinks fixed and worked out. It's usually painful to get going. Well, Grunt is kind of the non-Microsoft version. It's one of the bigger ones and better ones you'll see more often. So here's a basic template, and one of the cool things about the website is it's a really good place to get started, especially if you're starting from scratch. Typically we don't do that with Visual Studio because it likes the T4 templates for us. But you can click copy, that'll copy all this code to the board, to your clipboard. You can paste it in, and as you can see, it's using CDNs and other things to download everything you need so you can run a page pretty quick. All the examples work pretty well on the site. They have different frameworks that pretty much explain everything you need to know. If you spend just an hour or two playing on the Bootstrap site, pretty quickly you'll get the feeling it's all the standards. There's not a ton to know. At first it seems like there is, but you find that you use probably the same 10 things over and over. Every once in a while you'll come across something that's really cool that you can't wait for a project to come along where you actually get to use that. One of my favorite ones is the reordering one, and I'll actually demo that to you. So some of these, let's see, what's that? So this is like a typical carousel that you see on tons of different websites. It's pretty cool to have this functionality just there for you just because you loaded Bootstrap. This used to be, not too many years ago, this was really a pain to implement. And you didn't see it very often because it wasn't fun to implement. The different formats, framework structures, this is typically how a blog looks. It gives you the structure of the framework so that you can easily use this and then just swap out the, that doesn't look like Latin, I'm not sure what language they're using here. But it's a good way to actually come here and not only learn stuff, but sometimes I'll come here to grab a login page. That's something that could take 10, 15 minutes to create on your own, or you could do it in about 30 seconds by coming to the site and copying the code. A sticky footer nav bar. Oh, that way. But, of course, this is going to scroll. But basically what that's going to do is if it was scrolling, the nav bar, it stays on top all the time. A lot of times you do that with the menu bar at the top. If you're building a type of application that needs a lot of space, you know, like you're really trying to fill out maybe a forms where you're filling out a lot of forms, you might want the nav bar to scroll up and out of the way so that you have more room for your forms, especially if there's not a lot of navigation. However, if you're building a site for a client who's more interested in, say, branding, they want their brand, their logo in your face all the time because you're not going to be on the site very long, or there's a lot of menu options, you might want that menu to stay all the time, and this page scrolls up underneath it. The off-canvas. So this gives you a different look on. So we have links here and menu up here, but as we get smaller, the media queries kick in, and you can see it toggle back and forth there. So now we have drop down. So this is the way it would look on a smaller device, and this is the way this would look on a smaller device. Really cool functionality considering you really don't have to do anything other than use the template to get it. That would take me typically do all the stuff in the beginning. I used to spend days trying to get that kind of stuff to work. Bootlamp. This is something I don't use very often because I tend to think that, like most coders, that my code is flawless until somebody uses it. But this is a site you can actually go to. This is actually the GitHub repo. But you can go to the site, put in your URL, and it'll give you all the stuff you messed up on, a list of it. Oh, here it is. No, not sure why they don't have the link straight to it. Community, yeah, disabling responsiveness. So typically, the whole reason, not the whole reason, but a big reason for using Bootstrap is you want your site to be responsive. If for some reason you want to go back to the table days and have your site non-responsive, I'm not exactly sure why you would do that. The only thing I can think of is if you're building a dashboard app that's only going to be used internally, and it's, you know what monitors it's going to be used on because it's only used in the office or something like that. But typically, I can't think of too many reasons you would want it unresponsive. Is it anybody think of?
No, I think that was a complete waste that they did that because even with the internal tool, why not just make it responsive to begin with? So
Yeah, I mean,
so I don't know. It's probably just for backward compatibility.
You know, and even with a tool, I mean, we've seen here with these presentations, you may be remoting in from somewhere else and your resolution's all messed up, and then it's you guys saw that 2 weeks ago how hard it was to navigate around when you're seeing what you're not used to seeing. A lot of this, okay, so with Bootstrap, I'm pretty sure Bootstrap did this. I know jQuery did it. Up through, and jQuery up to version 1.3, a big bulk of the library, when they went from 1.2 to 1.3, they didn't change any of the functionality that I'm aware of or add anything new. What they did do was remove all the Internet Explorer stuff 8 and below, because there's not too many of you who are old enough in here to remember 8 and below. Microsoft has this awesome history of being a royal pain, even between their own browsers. Firefox always worked back in the day. Netscape was always great. Mosaic, all of these stuff. Microsoft consistently, every time they came out with a new browser, it seemed to be a whole new set of rules. And the stuff you wrote for 6 didn't work in 7, and the stuff in 8 broke everything. And then they came out with 9, and everything got good for a while through 10, and now they have Edge, which is a non-plug-in browser, and it's getting weird again. So Microsoft finally decided to go strictly by the book, which they never did before, and so now they're just outside. They're way off base again, but just on the other side of the fence this time. So a lot of the stuff that you find in Bootstrap, this section is just basically saying, if you seriously need to support IE 8 and below, you're going to have to do some extra work to get it to look nice in those browsers. And we don't need to talk about Windows Phone. I was hoping it would take off, but nope. Some of the stuff I'm just scrolling over because, like I said, in this meeting, we're going to cover the stuff that's used commonly. And most of this stuff, I've been using it for a long time. And a lot of stuff I don't even pay attention to because it's just not needed that often. Accessibility. I don't think I've actually ever heard it pronounced, but I believe it's called ARIA. ARIA? I'm not sure. Basically what the accessibility is for, and we'll see some examples of that in a little bit, but when you see it, what that is that's for devices that take advantage for basically handicaps. If you can't see very well and you need audio, you can set up tags in Bootstrap, which are actually native to how HTML works in general, browsers work in general, so that they can hear what you've typed in for the label, say. Or it may have different types of interfaces. Maybe they can't use a keyboard or a mouse or something like that. I don't know how difficult it is. I've never worked for a company that had to actually implement that. But in general, there's things you can do just for general purposes to make it easier for just the standard. I did have a neighbor who was partially blind, and when he would use his browser, I would hear his browser when he went to certain sites start speaking to him about what the browser was finding on it, and adding this kind of stuff into the tags does help those out.
Hey, Jason, technically from, she's not, I don't know if she's not here, I don't know if she's online, but our one designer, Jen, she did say that, yes, that technically, especially our public websites, should be accommodating because we're a government charter, like a lot of the funding we get is from NIH. So in theory, we should be doing all those things. However, we haven't been audited in a while for that, so there's probably some issues that we've done, but like sometimes when I work with developers, I say, do the simple things, like if you have an image, make sure you put the alt tags, all those type of things that help with with screen readers and things like that. We don't enforce all those because, like I said, we haven't, but I know the one designer, she's like, we should be doing this. We don't have enough of this controls in place to do that, and if we do, we will have to correct for that. So it was nice that Twitter Bootstrap had some of that stuff in place, but.
And it does help. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the T4 templates, when you generate an MVC application or something like that, you'll see, and in examples a lot, you'll see those, label 4 attributes, stuff like that, describing the text box you're supposed to enter information in, stuff like that, which helps those.
Verizon have the accessibility, because we need to implement that for Verizon.
For Verizon,
when I work for Verizon, yes.
Was that
it's
difficult?
With its own technology then I work on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so but they have to have the functionality for all customers. So that's why then it seems like if you hover the text, it will speak, like it will say the word. Yeah,
cool.
Something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, the only experience I had was with my neighbor, and I thought that was kind of cool because it took me off guard at first. I thought he was watching something, which I thought was weird because he can't see very well.
We used a tool called JAWS. It's a screen reader, and we had it for the credit union I worked for, and I had to test it out, and I don't know how they get through it because it said everything on the website.
Tags and everything?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about tags, but it would say like, welcome to GTE.
Okay, anything visible on
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly. Wow. So.
Huh. So that must take forever to go through a web page.
I would think so, unless they know how to make shortcuts or.
Can you do scrolling? Like, can you fast forward it or?
Yeah, you could speed it up.
You could speed it up? Wow. Mobile first, you can setup viewports. You can, with Bootstrap, you can get incredibly intense with it. Typically, I see media queries set up for 3 different resolution, I think, is the standard that I usually see. You get your big screen, your tablet, and your phone. And a lot of times I'll see, the big screen and the tablet may keep the big header in there with, a branding type thing, maybe a skyline, building stuff, but then when it hits the phone, that takes up the whole first page of the phone, so that disappears. But I have been on a few sites where as I scrolled in, it was constantly, it must have had 15, 20 different translations in there for the different resolutions, which makes it really smooth, but I'm not sure how many people actually take the time to go, oh, that's really cool looking. So basically, your wrapper class is a container. That's how you say, okay, Bootstrap, everything in here is important. I don't know why we typically use container fluid. When you're using the grid system, container fluid is not really necessary. You can just use container because the grid system actually shapes your page anyway as it gets smaller or bigger depending on what resolution you're on. Anybody heard of the term mixins? One. Mixins are interesting. Think of it as coding for style sheets, something that you typically think of as not a coding language. Variables, stuff like that, decision making. With mixins, you can do some really cool stuff, and you use it pretty heavily in stuff like LESS or SAS. But a lot of times you'll see mixins for contours, when it starts out dark and gets lighter. Yeah. I don't know why my mind just blank on that. So here's our media queries. Anybody familiar with media queries? Basically what media queries are is the browser, the style sheet can actually see information about the resolution and different things. So basically what we're looking at here is if the min width is small for tablets, we're looking at 768 pixels and up, medium devices, and then large devices. So we can set up variables. Basically what we're doing here is setting up variables so that when it sees a big screen device, it's going to say, okay, that means all our gutters, or the gutter is space between objects. So if you have 2 boxes, the gutter would be typically either 25 pixels. Usually though, the standard up until a couple years ago was like 25 pixels was the magic number. They changed that to be an even number so that you can easily, with a variable, divide it in half and have consistent margins between them. And also with the grids, we have these grid options: column extra small, column medium, and column large. It works like style sheets, but backwards. So typically a style sheet, if it says, I want the font to be 25 pixels. And then further down, so it always goes top to bottom, closer into the actual element, the piece of text. If it comes across another one that says, in the style sheet that says, no, I want the font to be 10 pixels, this text will now pick up that instead. So it cascades and overrides itself. This kind of works backwards. Instead of from getting bigger to smaller, the closer you get to the element. This goes from smallest to biggest. So if you say column small, it's going to cover everything from that resolution up. Okay, so if it's on a big screen, you've set the column sizes to be small, well then it's going to kind of crunch everything down to be 750 pixels. So it's going to anticipate, even though, now if you set another one for column large, then it'll pick up that one instead if it's a large device. And that was always confusing to me because I was always wondering which one I should pick. After a while, I realized that you typically don't see it. So like here in the example, we see class equals column medium 1, and then some information. But you can string those together and say, oh, and also this is also a large. So if it's on so right now, if this ends up on a large screen, it's going to take the medium resolutions. But if I also put a large in there, it'll say, oh, I can also take the large too. And since it's large, it'll take that one instead. The last number. So this is the pattern you see. Column, size, and then a number. The numbers have to add up to 12. So the grid is built on so for each row, you want these to add up to 12. Okay, so we have a row. Inside the row, you have your columns. Okay, and the number of columns in that row need to add up to 12. If you don't, there are people, designers, and that will push past 12 and get different results on purpose. It's unusual and weird, but typically you want it to be 12. Back in the day when we did tables, a lot of developers would have the habit of setting the border to 1 while they're working on it, because you wanted all your tables to match up on each row. See, because if you didn't, certain browsers would throw something out off the side and other browsers wouldn't. So you think everything looks great because you typically develop in one browser, and you go, and Keith freaks out because you've got stuff all over the page because your tables didn't line up perfectly. And then right before you go to testing, you turn that back to 0 so you can't see all the grids. Well, this is similar to that. You want your columns to add up to 12, or you're going to get some weirdness on different browsers.
Do you have to create your tables with divs in here? I mean, are there other options? What if you had a control, or how do you control it in that case? It's not a div. Does that only work with divs?
No, it doesn't only work with divs. Divs is the standard you're going to use a div. Yeah, because if you use a table, tables are inflexible, and they expect table row, table data, and they have to be nested in that order. Where a div, now if you try to put a column outside, you will get some IntelliSense giving you some warnings. If you've got a row and then a column, and then you got a column outside of the row, like if the pattern doesn't match what IntelliSense is looking for, it'll give you some warnings, but it's not going to blow up the page.
But pretty much everything renders as divs these days in these JavaScript libraries and stuff. By the time it gets to the page, it's divs. Mm-hmm. I mean, as a general sense. I mean, I haven't done a lot of that. When I was doing pages, I was doing tables.
Yeah.
So I'm just not sure what it ends up being in the HTML. I mean, because you're starting sometimes you have the tool you're using to create that grid, right?
Yeah, the divs are more flexible, but I have a feeling that Henry's got a much better answer than I do.
No, I was just going to say that technically, yes, you would do this, and this would be your initial layout, but they do have some of their tools. I see it there. They have table functions so that you can emulate, if you needed a true table, they have, but it doesn't, it probably most likely does not render as a table. I forget what the actual, their tool is, but it emulates as if you were using a table.
And the benefit I found out of that is actually you can implement scrolling inside of that.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing that I've used it for, because since I was able to get rid of tables, I got rid of tables
right
real quick.
And don't worry, you get used to it. Just get rid of tables, man. Totally good.
And and a lot of times we'll use something, if we're just using, so we're inside of a div column and everything, and we're doing something small, a lot of times I'll use like a paragraph, a P, okay, because I just wanted to do something small with this one piece of text versus everything else in there.
Can you nest it? Like
You can nest divs as deep as you want.
Oh, okay.
And I've gotten to the point sometimes where if you're building a really intricate UI, you'll have divs go all the way off the side of you'll have them so deeply nested depending on how intricate that UI is. that you can get really intense with the UIs and still have them flexible, responsive to different resolutions. So this is basically how it looks when you say, I want, so here's what I said, you can put two together, okay? So if we're on a small screen, I want it to just use up all 12 columns, okay? If I'm on a medium screen, I'm not sure why they have 6 here. Henry, does that make sense to you?
It really doesn't, because technically in the small screen, that first piece should take up the full thing. The other one, I don't know why. It would, but there's no other equivalent to say, hey, this is 6, so where's the next part to it?
The 8 and the 4 match up. I never noticed this before, but I'll have to research that. And as you can see, the third column, the third row, I should say, actually does use, 6 and 6, 12. So from the extra small screen all the way up to the large screen, you're going to get 2 columns there. Where on the first one, the way this reads, on a small screen, this should go all the way across. And on a big screen, it should take, from a medium size up, it should only take up 8 spots and bring up the column that would end up down here up next to it on medium and up resolutions. Yeah, the second column looks weird too. I've never noticed that before. I need to research that and see why that's like that.
Full width, the other half width, that's what they're talking about. So I guess it would go to the second row and just be half the size for the 12 and the 6.
If you look at the code down here in this section, the actual code works. This says for extra small, this is going to display all the way across the page. But if you're medium it up, you're going to see this, and you're going to see this next column up next to it, right?
Right.
Right, because it's a 4. Oh, that's why, because on here that's how it displays on a big screen. That's why it looks weird.
Right.
The code itself does make sense. That up there is how it would visually lay out on a big screen. Okay. Okay. The important thing to take away from this one, for the people who can't see me, is there's a comment on the page that says optional, clear the extra small columns if their content doesn't match in height. Basically, the very next line of code, you see a visible excess block. That's handling the visibility of the, like I said before, on smaller screens, you want it to look different than you want it on big screens. And that is one of the ways to handle that. A lot of these things take a little bit, well, as of everything in CSS, I'm sure Henry agrees, is that it's all just experimentation and practice and playing with it until you get it to look the way you want. It's not like coding where you actually have a definite pattern.
And that's why I think for UI development, it's not for everybody, because it is can be annoying and aggravating at times, but the end result is something that's beautiful, I think, if you get it to work right.
Colors, layouts, and anything that looks pleasing is much better, to me, works a lot better with somebody with a creative mind, which is usually not a developer's mind. Somebody who is a code monkey and is writing code all day long. I don't know about you guys. I tend to write code over and over until I get it to work, which is a little bit like CSS, but totally different. If I start playing with colors in CSS, my code usually eventually starts to work, whereas with design, it gets worse and worse and worse the more I play with it. It never gets better. Offsetting columns. Don't use this as much, so I won't cover it as deep. I'm sure you can do some really cool stuff. I need to practice this more because I'm still in the old school mindset of if I have a table that doesn't take up any space, I just throw a non-breaking space in there and a div tag to give me that spot I need. So this is a much more efficient way of doing it. Performance-wise on the browser, I'm not sure if it's better to just block it out with the extra divs or to tell it to gap them. So I would have to look that up. Maybe that's something somebody would like to deep dive into. And it would be kind of cool if somebody decided to deep dive in and see what works better, what's more performant, what, a good standard pattern to use here at USF. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the nesting. You can get really crazy with the nesting in the rows. Column ordering. Another one I have absolutely no idea why you would want to do this, because maintenance would be weird. Normally you look at the page and you look at the HTML and it follows. When you get used to seeing this and this, it makes sense to you. When you spend 6, 8, 10 hours a day looking at this stuff, it makes sense. When you see the 9 on the right, you expect it to be the second div, not the first one. So I don't know why you would visually swap it back, because maintenance-wise, when you're writing that HTML, that's going to look completely backwards. So I don't know when or why you would want to do that, but you can if you found a reason to.
I think the only times I've ever done this is if you only had like one item and you wanted to push it, but then you're like, well, why wouldn't you use the offset?
Yeah,
So,
or a float left, or the hammer one.
That is switching the columns.
Yeah, it's
Maybe depending on the culture, you want to show first name first and last name last. You switch.
Yeah. So see the second one. Normally, if this didn't have this switch that they're doing with the push and pull, the first one would show on the left and the second one would show on the right, which means these would be switched around. But since they're using this push and pull, it inverts them, which to me, maintenance-wise, would be weird. I would mess that up a couple times and then go, oh, why did we do it this way? And then I'd be worried that they did it that way for a reason, and then I'd have to go find Henry or one of the designers to figure out what they were thinking.
Drive people nuts.
This is one of those things that you go, this makes no sense. You fix it, and then Keith comes back to you and says, why did you destroy this whole section? We had it that way for a reason.
And more likely that's somebody on their last day.
Is there a case where you have form where you ask for people names? Let's say in Asians, like Asia, they have the name backward, right? So you should the first name, the last name first, and something like this. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe programmingly you're going to do push, but not default.
Okay.
I
that would make sense. So I wouldn't have to rewrite the whole div. I would just change the class in it. That would make sense. Variables. This gets back to less and SAS. Henry probably appreciate this. So with less and SAS, it makes sense. You can set a variable, say site color, or primary 3 colors, and not have to do a search and find and replace all 300 of them in the style sheet. You can place it in one spot, and it'll go ahead and pick up and rebuild it to, it's actually, the style sheet is actually what goes down, and it does have it in there 300 times, because that's the only thing the browser understands. But when you use these preprocessors like less, it's the same thing as TypeScript with JavaScript. It'll rewrite it to do what you meant, and then that's what goes down to the browser. Here's a good example where I said a lot of times nowadays the gutters are even numbers, so that you can do a divide by 2 and the page will line up nice and tight, instead of having that one that sits slightly to the left and drives you nuts because you can't figure out how to get shoved over just 3 or 5 pixels to the right. Typography. This is pretty much self-explanatory. I don't think we need to cover that too much unless you guys have questions about different font size and fonts and any of that. Basically, they're based off, so you can set up different tags to, by default, use different styles or fonts or shapes or sizes. Body copy, the same thing. That's anything that's not overridden below the body is going to take on that attribute or that characteristic. Inline. This isn't necessarily Bootstrap. This is stuff that we've been able to do for a long time. Although I don't remember ever using that delete one. That's kind of interesting. But small, we used to use strong, and strong here. For a long time we did bold, but then we were told to use strong, and we never knew why, what was different or better about them.
That's for the screen readers for the blind. If you do bold, it just renders the text bold. If you do strong, then the screen reader will actually read it as bold.
Excellent.
Very big, like, become better.
I had no idea, all these years, I had no idea why we were supposed to suddenly start using strong.
I had to do some web pages for the blind at one of my jobs, so that's where
Very
I
cool,
learned that one.
thank you.
Same for emphasis versus the little I.
Italic instead, okay. Wow, that's really cool. The usual text right, left, justify, no wrap. A lot of the stuff, I can't remember using recently in a long time. Used to use it all the time. These are all just more interesting to look at than you end up using really. This was kind of cool. I forgot you could do this, and then when I saw it again, I'm like, I've never used that. But different codes in the tag and the actual tags, you can set up, so this means keyboard. So I thought that was kind of, it's not often that we do kind of document type stuff to teach people how to use the app, but okay, so tables. Basically, the table class implies table. Up here where it seems repetitive, it's not, it's just telling Bootstrap, yeah, this is going to be a table, even though it's a table tag. But again, you can do scrolling, you can, by setting up bordered, so this one you can see doesn't have vertical lines. This is a table bordered, so it does. Hover, changes on hover, I'm not sure. You can do different, this is the contextual classes, so these are kind of useful. So you have active, success, info, warning, and danger. Those are standard colors that can be overridden, obviously. And, one thing I want to point out, I just said overridden. So in style sheets, I made this mistake. I was building a Telerik site, Sitefinity, huge $10,000 license for one instance. It's a giant CMS like WordPress, only a monster compared to WordPress, way better. But I learned the hard way that don't ever mess with style sheets that aren't yours, ever. If you want to override the color of danger or warning or info, you do it in your style sheet. And just make sure your style sheet comes after the Bootstrap style sheet, okay? Because that puts yours closer to what the element that you're trying to change, right? I started changing all the styles to get it to look like our site. Well, Sitefinity has the public side, and then it has the admin side, which is how you build the entire site. And next thing I know, I had completely destroyed the admin site too. Like, you couldn't even use it anymore. I broke it up so bad. So yeah, hard lesson, never change Bootstrap style sheets. If you download a third-party app or something like that that has its own style sheets, or a menu, a side menu, I just did that for one of the one IRB app we're working on now. Don't change those styles. They've played with them long enough to get them to look the way they want. If you want to change the color, just change it on yours. So these are standard colors and fonts and stuff so that a standard warning looks like a warning. And I'm sure that their designers know what a warning looks like better than I do, because that would probably make it nasty. We're running out of time. So as you scroll through the site, you'll see these kind of cool things where you can add in icons. We didn't even get to glyphs. Yeah, buttons, responsive utilities. At this point, I would recommend, we spent a lot of time on Bootstrap, and for next, 2 weeks from now, we really should get onto the jQuery and jQuery UI. There's a lot we need to cover there. You guys want to just spend a little bit of time so that when we start the jQuery, a lot of this stuff is just standard stuff, but you're going to get into some of the stuff that requires, a little bit of knowledge of jQuery. How many people here are familiar with the term jQuery? Okay, and everybody, how many people here have actually used it? Okay, so pretty much everybody here knows why we would want to use a jQuery, right? And in the next 2 weeks, so, all right, so I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to be covering in 2 weeks when we do this again. jQuery basically works with the DOM and does a lot of different stuff. You can do Ajax with it. It just makes JavaScript programming simpler. It's JavaScript. It sits on top of JavaScript. It works with WebKit if you're on Chrome, Trident if you're on IE, the older versions of IE. Those are the browser engines. That's what runs JavaScript. The DOM is document object model. That's basically everything you see inside the browser. It's what the browser uses to display, function, move, cause events, capture events, everything you would do in a programming environment. That's what the DOM handles. So jQuery handles a lot of the really common stuff that we do all the time. We'll get into the selectors and events and a whole bunch of other stuff. jQuery UI. There's lots of libraries out there, but jQuery UI is specifically for jQuery. It's a companion tool, and it adds extra functionality. You've got, accordions, autocompletes. We actually use this on one of the autocomplete on one of the applications we're doing, RDC. Button pickers, just more intense stuff that you don't use as often in jQuery, but gives you more functionality for some of the more cooler stuff you need, the calendars, stuff like that, like the date pickers. You can do all kinds of really cool stuff with date pickers. jQuery mobile. Why do we need jQuery mobile if we have responsive? It's not running as a native app. It's still a website. And we have jQuery and Bootstrap so that it looks good. It works on a phone, right? jQuery mobiles is optimized to be more specifically for a mobile device. You don't have a mouse. You don't have a keyboard. So it's more touch-enabled. Native apps intrinsically have a delay in them. With jQuery mobile, it can feel more responsive. They do things to optimize it, make it feel a little better. Things are bigger to click on. You have to work harder on that. One of the things cool about jQuery mobile is, well, it's cool if you're me. They have this thing called Theme Roller, which is awesome, in that when you're completely design challenged like I am, you can actually set up different themes just by clicking and dragging. So you can create how you want everything to kind of look on your mobile device. And you can save this off and download it. You can mix and match. You can do some pretty cool stuff. Even I can make a really awful looking site in just a few minutes, but somebody who knows how to color, match patterns and colors can do some really awesome stuff really quick. Download the CSS for it and hand it off to the developer, and the developer looks like magic. Looks like he actually knows what he's doing. So that's one of the cool, great things about jQuery Mobile. It also sets up, typically iPhones look like iPhones, and Android phones have a different, they have different navigation. They're different. When you look at the same app on two different phones, just by looking at it, you can tell one's on an iPhone, one's on an Android. They have different hardware, even buttons and navigations. With jQuery Mobile, it's easier to make that application look like a branded, specific USF application, even though it's running on two different devices, two different brands. Sizzle is actually part of jQuery. It's their super fast, super lightweight DOM selector, and it works with the DOM. Usually you would use this if you're not using jQuery, using some other types of JavaScript engines or classes or frameworks, and you can drop this in and make the DOMs, more used to what you used to with jQuery, and super lightweight. And then the last one is the one that Keith will love, and that's the QUnit unit testing. So we got about 4 minutes. That's a quick overview of what we're going into next week. Anybody have any questions?
So I'm actually really hard.
Okay.
So we have all these JavaScript technologies. We have Angular, jQuery UI, Bootstrap. How do you know how to mix and match everything, and what likes to play with each other?
Okay.
And is there standard stacks that work well together, or
There's two things going on there. One is you've got stuff like Handlebars and Mustache and then jQuery and all these stuff. There's a ton of libraries out there. Ember, Angular, React. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on. Some of these libraries are older that have been kind of replaced, but developers get used to doing something and they like to look good at work, so they tend to stay with the things they're good at, even though jQuery came along and was better than Handlebars. But then again, you may be doing something that's really lightweight and you really only need a Handlebars. It just has a few little places on the screen where you need to insert dynamic content into the DOM. So usually what you're looking for is, how many developers are we going to be able to find that can do this technology or is familiar with it? How hard is it to learn? What are we building? Are we building something really complex where we might want a single-page application built? In that case, you're going to want to go with something like AngularJS because it handles routing and context and a whole bunch of other stuff, dependency injection, all the stuff you need to do to write a full application that runs in the browser. Handles all your service layer, so you can run your promises to go up to the server and get JSON feeds and post JSON and do all the stuff you need. That is a huge, fully functional, really robust, really steep learning curve library that you can do really cool stuff in. But you might not need it.
But what about, thinking of back-end code, what about dependencies? Like if I'm running AngularJS, do I need jQuery with that, or does every library have everything it needs? There must be dependencies.
There's actually talk recently of coming out with a standard JavaScript library, kind of like a .NET type library. But your question about AngularJS, Angular ships with JQLite, which is a very small version of jQuery. If you include it before you include your Angular, if it sees that jQuery is included, it will default to use that jQuery instead. But typically, no. These libraries this is a open source world now. Even Microsoft is going open source. and joining those communities. And so you have a lot of little tiny functional libraries that you can either Frankenstein together like you tend to with libraries like Ember, gives you the base, and then you got to put in all these routing libraries and all this other stuff to make a full application, which means your developers have to know a lot more different languages. But they're all based in JavaScript, so it's mainly just learning their syntax and nuances and bugginess. And as we're getting further and further into this momentum and change, you are seeing bigger libraries like the Angular JSs and the Reacts that do more stuff, although with React you do have to include other libraries. It's kind of a half and half. Do we want to build a library that takes care of a specific function and leverages other people's stuff in the open source community to get the functionality I want? Or do I want to build something monolithic like Angular JS that does everything for you but is huge, and there are other libraries out there that do the same thing, just pieces of it. So I don't think, it just depends on what you're trying to build and what your resources are as developers. You agree, Dan?
When did building web pages get so difficult?
Actually, about 3 years ago, you could actually have a whole career just in one piece of the UI, whereas before you had to be a .NET Stack developer or a Java developer or PHP developer or Cold Fusion. Now you can just be a Angular guy and have a pretty cool, you could be a UI guy and kind of know all of them, but if you're going to be really, really, really good at something and okay at the other stuff, you got to pick something like Angular, or maybe you're just a web API guy, a RESTful interface guy, working in the middle tier. That's a whole career now too. So you can be an ORM person, and with Hibernate or in Hibernate or Entity Framework, and that can be your whole career. Just learning domain-driven design will crush your brain. I mean, there's so much you can do just with the ORMs. So it's pretty, big data is getting really big now. So, any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you guys for showing up, and it's good to actually get to hang out and see you guys, whether just a little crack in your door.
Feedback form, that'd be great too. Feedback forms, so you can make it better every time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.